Okay, we're on page 14 or 15. The 4 questions. Many households, the children recite it one by one, starting with the youngest. And in some households, there's a whole Yiddish explanation for each one. The child recites the whole thing, and everybody oohs and ahs and tells him how wonderful he is. And it takes about 20 minutes to go through the children, and it's wonderful. And then our custom is, after that, we all say the 4 questions as part of saying the Haggadah. Now, there are many difficulties here. First of all, if you follow the punctuation that you have in the art scroll Haggadah, it's 1 question with 4 answers. Why is this night different from all the nights? I'll tell you why. Because on all the nights we can eat chametz and matzah, and it's only matzah, etc., etc. There are 4 reasons why it's different. That's not 4 questions. If you think that the 4 are also questions, how come on this night we eat only matzah, not chametz and matzah, etc., etc., then you have 5 questions. Why is the night different, and why are these aspects there? Neither one justifies the idea of 4 questions. The Rabbi has a very interesting analysis here. First of all, the first sentence in strict biblical Hebrew isn't a question. Ma, in front of a verb or an adjective, isn't asking a question, it's making an exclamation. Instead of how, because ma is really how, or what, is this night different? How is this, instead of how is this night different, it's how different this night is. When Jacob wakes up from his dream of the ladder, he says, Ma nora hamakom hazeh. Now there's a how in front of awesome, and this is this place. Jacob is not asking, how many awesomeness points should we give to this place? 84? 92? How awesome is it? No, he's saying how awesome this place is as an exclamation. And then the 4 are illustrations of how different this night is. Okay, but that doesn't explain why there are any questions here. The Rabbi says the author of the Haggadah is asking a 4-part question. To understand what he's asking, let's look at the 4 elements in the question. The first one's about chametz and matzah. We only eat matzah. What is matzah? Well, in the middle of the very same page, we said, holach ma'anya. This is the bread of deprivation. This is the bread that we ate as slaves. The second one is that we eat bitter herbs. Why do we eat bitter herbs? We're not masochists. We're remembering the pain of the slavery. The third is dipping. Listen, salad is good for you, and some elements in salad that taste nice, but we don't just eat salad. We have a sauce that we put on, a dressing. We eat salad with a dressing. That's not the words of a slave. That's a person who's free and who takes care that his food should be, well prepared. And leaning, reclining, they had banqueting couches. And that was the way the nobility had a celebratory meal. They reclined on couches. So, says the Rabbi, you have here 2 elements which we call slavery and 2 elements which express freedom. Now, says the Rabbi, think about the Jewish calendar. The Jewish calendar has a number of designated days in which things are commemorated. Some commemorate great successes, great salvations, great miracles that God did for us, and they are happy days of celebration. Some commemorate disasters that took place. Those days are typically fasts, and they are days of commemorating sad events. What kind of commemoration is Pesach? Particularly the first night of Pesach. You have two symbols of slavery and two symbols of freedom. What are you expressing? What's the message? So these four elements give you a contradiction which raises the question. And the answer is in the very next word, very next words of the Haggadah. I want you to conceptualize what you're reading. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and Hashem, our God, took us out from there. What answer to the question that we raised is expressed in those words? Again, we have many commemorations of happy, successful salvations, and we celebrate them. We have many commemorations of disasters, and we remember them, and we fast, and we feel the pain of them. Here you have two symbols of slavery and two symbols of freedom. What are you commemorating? You can answer it in one word. Transition. It's the transition from one to the other. That's why it has two symbols of slavery first and two symbols of freedom afterwards. It's the transition from slavery to freedom, which means that our events don't only commemorate states of affairs, but they commemorate processes also. This was a process of going from slavery to freedom. So it's a question with four prongs, and it has a single answer, that's what we're commemorating. That's why we have symbols of slavery and symbols of freedom. Okay? Now, I should have done this first, but one thing's for sure. This is not the question of a young child who can't remember what happened last year, and he sees strange things happening, and he's asking, wow, look at this. How come this happened? How come this is happening? His interest is sparked by the unusual nature of the events that are taking place. Why can that not be? Why is it impossible that should be the explanation for the four questions? That a child is observing the events and seeing them to be strange, is asking why they are there. Why is that a wrong explanation? Well, first of all, some of them haven't happened yet. Matzah and no chametz. How does he know that after this meal is over, they won't bring out a birthday cake? Who told him? During the year, you have matzah and chametz on the same table. Dipping twice. He only saw one dipping. How does he know there's going to be a second dipping? He's not remarking on things that happen, because some of the things he asks about haven't happened yet. And also, strange things have happened that he's not asking about. Never do you have a case where after Kiddush you wash your hands without a blessing and then go on with other matters. After Kiddush, you wash your hands with a blessing and you make a motzi. I'm red. Never do you have a little bit of vegetable before Kiddush, karpas. Why isn't he asking about that? So this passage needs a more sophisticated explanation. It can't just be the child asking about what he sees. Okay? Okay. Now, there are two sentences in this paragraph. The first two sentences, if you read them carefully, which of course I heartily recommend, you should be able to see that the two sentences contradict one another. Let's see if you get that. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, but Hashem our God took us out from there with a mighty hand and outstretched arm. Had not the Holy and Blessed be He taken our fathers out from Egypt, then we, our children, our children's children, would have remained subservient, which is not bad. I'll tell you why that is. In the Hebrew, it's, well, not bad, to Pharaoh in Egypt. What is the contradiction between those two sentences? An open, explicit contradiction. It's not subtle, not philosophical, it's not Kabbalistic. It's just an open, explicit contradiction. Who left Egypt?
Slaves.
Really? Look at the second sentence.
We were all men of wisdom, understanding, and experience. This one.
The second sentence starts, had the Holy One, that's after the period.
Men subservient to Pharaoh in Egypt.
Why are you skipping the first half of the sentence?
Had not the Holy One blessed he taken our fathers out of
Stop. Who did he take out?
fathers?
Yeah. In the first sentence, who did he take out?
Us.
Yes, we were slaves. So
And?
contradiction.
Not only we were slaves, and? In the first sentence?
Took us out of
So the first sentence says he took us out, and the second sentence he took our fathers out. That's a contradiction.
Yeah.
Okay. So on this page, you can resolve the contradiction with a little bit of a trick, but when you get to page 45, it's not going to work anymore. Here you could say, sometimes I have students here from Great Britain, and I remind them that the ragtag, informal American settlers shooting from behind trees, with cork guns, we defeated the great British Army. We talk like that, right? So if somebody says, Gottleib, were you there shooting? Who's we? I mean, the American nation. Not me personally. American nation. We defeated you. Our nation defeated your nation. People talk like that. So the sentence here could mean, we took us, meaning the Jewish nation. The second sentence specifies which people in the Jewish nation. So that doesn't have to be a contradiction. But on page 45, it's going to say that everyone should regard himself that he went out. That's a different story. We'll talk about that when we get there. So that's how, but you have to, I told you this yesterday about the we is the nation. We talked about, this year in exile, next year in Yerushalayim, in Eretz Yisrael, and I said, how are you going to say that in Jerusalem in a couple of weeks? And the answer is because you're not speaking for yourself, speaking for the nation. Yeah.
Why does the Pasuk assume that our children and our children's children would remain in that?
Okay, that's a good question. Now, your translator here did a very good job, because the verse says avodim, we were slaves, and it says if Hashem had not taken us out, we would have been mishu'abadim. That's not the same word. That's not the same word. They at least did a good job of changing the word. You ask, if Hashem hadn't taken us out, if it meant that we would have been slaves, empires come, empires go, empires are conquered. The Syrians could have taken us as slaves to them. There are revolts. Why would the Haggadah assume that we would have been, or the Pesach assume that we would have been slaves? Haggadah. So the answer is to pay attention to the word mishu'abad. Mishu'abad comes from Jewish civil law. Let me ask you a question of law. See if you get this right. You want to buy a house. You don't have the money. You go to the bank. You borrow 60% of the money to buy the house and use the bank's money to buy the house. Who owns the house?
Bank.
No.
You.
You do. For example, if somebody trips and falls in the house, they sue you. They don't sue the bank. If the house burns down, you take the loss and you have to pay the bank anyway. Bank doesn't take the loss. That's why they make you take out insurance on the house. And they make you pay for it also. Because you own the house. You borrowed their money to buy the house. But you can't sell the house until you pay the bank. You cannot sell the house until you pay the bank. According to law, it can't be transferred until you pay the bank. So I sold my house in Baltimore, and we were there, and there are two checks. The buyer makes out two checks. One check to the bank to cover the remaining mortgage, and one check to us with the remainder of the price. And the check has to be certified that the mortgage is paid off before I can collect the check that was made out to me. So even though you own the house, there's a limit on what you can do with it. You're restricted in what you can do with it. That's shibud. Shibud in Jewish law is where There are certain rights that you can't exercise because somebody else has influence on what you have. It's yours, but you can't have full freedom to use it as you please. And one way to explain that in the Haggadah is this. Take a look at the culture and the standard of living of freed slave population and see how they do. I'm not going to go into all the politics about BLM and CRT and all the rest, but certainly the fact that the black population early on in the history of the United States was a slave population cost them deprivation over generations. No question that it cost them. They suffered the consequences because they were merely freed by release from the laws that made them slaves. That's all that happened. The rest of it was all naturalistic. We came out of Egypt, and 49 days later we accepted the Torah at Sinai. We became an Am Kadosh, a holy nation. For a group of people who were slaves for 90 years or so, to ascend to that level, that's not natural. So if we had escaped Egyptian slavery by some natural process, the slavery experience would still have had an effect on degrading us, depressing us, holding back our potentiality. Because Baruch Hu took us out and the opposite happened. We rose to a gigantic level. That could be how you understand the word here. The fact that the author of the Haggadah changed to Meshubad is very, very telling. Okay. Now comes what I mentioned to in the name of Rav Bullman. Even if we were all men of wisdom, understanding, experience, and knowledge of the Torah, it would still be an obligation upon us to tell about the Exodus from Egypt. Now, what do you hear here? Even if you know it all, there's an obligation to tell it. Well, that must mean that the point of the obligation is not to communicate information. It's a waste of time to communicate information you already have. Have I got something to tell you? 7 plus 5 is 12. Am I not wasting your time? Right? Tell you something that you already know? So obviously it says, even if we had all the knowledge and understanding at our fingertips, still it would be a mitzvah to tell. So what is the mitzvah? What is that being? What is it communicating? And I told you yesterday that the Hebrew phrase here is l'saper be Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's to experience, re-experience. Maybe I didn't tell you. Maybe I told them upstairs. Experience from the Exodus from Egypt. Just like it says when Moses grew up in the palace of Pharaoh, and then he went out to see his brothers, which means that he already understood that the Jewish people are his brothers. And it says, liros be'echav, to see his brothers, but it doesn't say liros es echav or liros echav. The particle is base. What's base doing? You don't roa ba shulchan or roa ba, ba ritzba or roa ba yad. You roa es. Liros be means to experience, to empathize, to experience what they experience. So the saper be means to relive the story. That means your knowledge isn't good enough. Your knowledge isn't good enough. The mitzvah of the evening is to relive the story. That's why everybody still has the obligation. And then he says, the more one, see, David used tell about, the more one speaks out the Exodus of Egypt, the more it's praiseworthy. So he said, as far as Rav Nachman Bullman, who was the Mashgiach Ohr Somayach 30 years ago, and he was a great thinker. He was also a Ger Chassid. He translated Sefer HaToda'ah, the book of our heritage, which is a classic. It goes through the whole year, month by month, and explains what's happening in the month, what the background is. It's a wonderful, wonderful resource. He translated that. So he said like this. Usually brevity is a virtue. If you have to communicate information, don't put in extra words. Don't leave anything out. But if you can say it with 20 words, you can say it with 15 words, say it with 15 words. Less to think about, The attention span doesn't have to be extended so long. Here it's saying the more words you use, the better it is. So again, you have a symptom of the fact that it's not communicating information. If it's poetry, Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Bells. Each stanza ends with bells, 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 like 15 times. A good recital, by the end of the poem, you're hearing the bells. You say, what do you have 15 for? Do 6. Excuse me. It's not a point of communicating information. It's a point of creating an experience. So here he says the excess of language, of speech, is to create the experience. But then he said something much deeper. Language is the way you express your deepest identity. You may see a person do something, but if you don't have a linguistic description from what he's doing, you can't understand it. You can't appraise it. You can't evaluate it. The guy didn't eat for 36 hours. Why did he do that? Well, maybe he's in a place where he's allergic to all the food. Or maybe it's a religious ritual. Or maybe he took a vow so as to qualify for 4 years of medical education, tuition free, like at Einstein Medical School now, where one of the teachers there gave $1 billion to the school. From now on, it's tuition free. Maybe this is a qualification for getting a free medical education. If you don't know why he's doing it, you can't understand it, you can't evaluate it. You can't get that unless you get a description in words. There's no other way you're going to get it. So, words express your deeper identity. Now, when we were in Egypt, we lost our grip on that deeper identity. Many of the Jews there went over to idol worship. The practice of circumcision ceased. Only the tribe of Levi continued it. We were supposed to be living in an isolated area, in a self-made ghetto. We dispersed throughout the population. This is explicit in the verses. So, that being the case, since we were in exile, not just physically in a geographical area which isn't the land of Israel, our culture was lost to us. Our speech was also in exile. That's why the Be'er Hasidim, of whom I said Rav Bulman was a member, take the word Pesach and break it up into 2 words. Peh, which means mouth, and Sach, which means speaks. The mouth speaks. Because here the mouth can finally speak words that are truly expressive of what it means to be a Jew. Up until that time, you didn't have that. And he compared it to a person who, Rahman son, lost his sight, became blind for 10 years. And then they perfect an operation. He has the operation, and the bandages are taken off his eyes. What did they not do? Right before high, okay. Good. Oh, no, it's this bad. Okay. So, what would he want to do? The bandages come off. He hasn't seen anything in 10 years. He wants to see. What does he want to see? Anything. It's not seeing the book or seeing the wall or seeing the picture. It's seeing. It's the seeing that's exciting for him. So it doesn't matter what he sees. Here too, it's the talking. It's talking as a Jew. It's talking, expressing a real Jewish identity. Then this part of the story, that part of the story, said it before, say it again, doesn't matter. I'm talking like a Jew. That was Rav Bulman's deep idea. And I'm going to show you, Mitzvah Hashem, that this idea that the mitzvah of the Haggadah is to relive the events rather than just to talk about them and describe them is a key to understanding a dozen different remarks in the Haggadah. As we go through it, we'll see this idea repeated over and over again. It's an extremely deep theme in the Haggadah. Now we have an event. It happened. Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon were gathered at the Seder in Bnei Brak. They, again, relived the exodus from Egypt all that night until the students came and said to them, "Our teachers, the time has come for the right reading of the morning Shema." Okay, just a technical legal detail. If it's time to read the Shema, it's not time to say the story anymore, because the night has passed. It's already day. Day, in this respect. So it means that the teachers lost track of the time, and it was the students who had to remind them of the time in order for them to realize that they're not fulfilling the mitzvah anymore. I find this difficult. Judaism is not a religion of the holy 12-year-old who teaches the 80-year-old what the truth is, and so on and so on. The title for our sages is Kanim, the elders, and it's only unusual when something like that happens. So unusual when Elazar ben Azariah was a teenager and they made him be the head of the Sanhedrin. Overnight his hair became white because it would be embarrassing and irregular that he should be there with black hair. So the idea that they lost track of time and the Talmud had to come and tell them something going on here that I don't understand. I'm just registering that's unusual. But what it does tell you is that they were doing the mitzvah of reliving the story. If it had been just a recital goes on until 6:31. 5:55, okay, half hour to go. Keep going. 5:20, just a few more minutes. 6:31. Okay, on to the next. No, they were involved. And that's part of why they lost, so to speak, they lost track of time. Now, there's a hidden piece of a lesson here, not hidden, but you have to look to the commentators. All 5 of these great sages could not trace their ancestry back to Egypt who were slaves. None of the 5 had ancestors in Egypt who were slaves, because some of them are Leviim, and the tribe of Levi was not enslaved, and some come from converts. And of course, the ancestors of the converts weren't there at all. So then the deeper message is, these people who can't say, it's my family tradition, it's my ancestor who was there, and that's why it's precious to me. No, it's again the theme of the people. It's because I'm a Jew, and I'm part of the Jewish people, and this is the experience of the Jewish people. That's why I was there. That's why I'm identifying with it, and that's why I'm reliving it. So that's also carried in this. But again, this is the story of reliving it. That's what caused them to lose track of the time. Here's what I told you a moment ago. Elazar ben Azariah said, I am like a 70-year-old man. But I could not succeed in having the exit from Egypt mentioned every night. I believe that you should say it twice in a 24-hour period. Once in the morning and once in the evening. And the rabbis disagree with me. And we discussed this, and we argued about this. And I wasn't able to support my opinion successfully. I'm choosing my words. Support successfully does not mean necessarily to conquer the other guy. Until Ben Zoma expounded it. Ben Zoma found a verse, and he explained the verse in such a way as to support my opinion. And the verse that he found is this: in order that you may remember the day that you left Egypt, all the days of your life. Now ask yourself, if the word all had been left out, what would you have said? To remember the exodus of Egypt, the days of your life. Maybe that doesn't include Thursdays? Maybe? Or maybe it doesn't include January? Would you think that? If it said you should remember the days of your life, wouldn't you naturally assume it meant all the days of your life? You wouldn't look for exceptions. So what does the word all contribute? The answer has to be, the word all contributes something that you wouldn't have known on your own. So Ben Zoma said, what the word all contributes is each 24-hour period twice. Not once, twice. Once in the morning and once in the evening. And that is what Elazar ben Azariah was happy about. He's explaining this verse to support his idea that it should be said twice a day. The phrase, the days of your life, would have indicated only the days. The addition of the word all indicates the nights as well. Now, when you're in discussion with somebody else and you disagree, there are 2 levels of responsibility. One is to protect yourself against their attack. And the other would be to conquer them and get them to agree with you. Both are important levels of supporting your position. Here what he has is support for his position that the knights are included. That doesn't necessarily mean that the rabbis have to give up. Indeed, the rabbis have a different way to explain the verse. The sages declare that the days of your life would mean only the present world, the present political makeup. The addition of all includes the era of the Messiah, Yemos Mashiach. So it's a question of historical periods. And we don't believe, say the sages, that all comes to mean the nighttime. No, we would say you shouldn't say it in the nighttime. Only that it shouldn't be canceled when the Messiah comes. Elazar ben Azariah has to say, I believe that when the Messiah comes, it could be canceled. But now we should say it in the nighttime. Okay, so now here is a piece of Jewish logic. We're agreeing that the word all has to indicate something which you naturally, intuitively would have thought should be left out. And then the word all comes to tell you, that's a mistake. Really, you should include that as well. So in each case, for Elazar ben Azariah and for the Chachamim, you have to ask, why would you have thought, without the word all, that these periods should be left out? And then, what cancels out that reasoning to tell you that you should be included? So the answer for Elazar ben Azariah is that daytime and nighttime have associations throughout Jewish literature. Daytime is a time of redemption, salvation, success, peace, prosperity, living in your own land. It's when things are good. And nighttime is exile, persecution, loss, tragedy, destruction. And now we're talking about remembering the exodus from Egypt. If you're living in exile, if you're living subject to the pressure of other nations, a person could ask, why are you remembering the exodus when you ended up here? You know better now than they were when they were slaves in Egypt. What is there to remember? That's an intuition that you shouldn't say it at night, in the night periods. And Rabbi Elazar says, I say you should say it in spite of that. In spite of that, you should say it. So we have to ask, why? If you, Rabbi Elazar, agree that intuitively nighttime is not a time to say it, and without the extra word all, you wouldn't have said it. But now the Torah said all, and you would have said all is including the nighttime. So we now see a proof that you should say it at night, even against your intuition, but we have no explanation for why that should be so. And I will stop to add a footnote to a footnote because my business is logic. There's a big difference between proving something and explaining it. Very often in life, you have proofs that something's so, and no explanation for why it should be so. A great deal of science is dedicated to explaining things that we know are true. We know they're true because we see that they're true, but we don't know why they happen. Scientific theories are concocted and tested to be able to explain why the things that we see happen. So here we have a proof, according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. To do it at night, we need an explanation. And one of the explanations given is this. Yes, we were slaves in Egypt, but there's one aspect of the slavery in Egypt which can't be repeated. It can't be repeated. And from that, the exodus from Egypt was permanent. And that is that the Egyptians succeeded in wiping out our national identity for all except the Levites. To a very great extent, not totally, but to a very great extent. And if you follow the Midrash, 80% of the Jewish population in Egypt died there in the 3 days of darkness. So their culture was lost to the extent that they couldn't be recovered. So that can't happen again. A Jew can opt out because he has free will, but no external power can deprive us of that identity. And this is the basis for the stories you hear that say about the Holocaust. People who managed to light oil on Hanukkah, who managed to bake matzahs in the concentration camps. Even in the death camps, they found a way to bake matzahs and have matzahs for the Seder. And there were skeptics there. Some people who lost it entirely. What are you doing? What's your future? And the answer is, I am what I am. And what I am is more important than this present. What future? It's more important. So this can't be done anymore. So that's the idea. You say it at night because no matter how bad things are, that identity that you have can't be taken away from you. That's Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. What about the Chachamim? The Chachamim say, intuitively, we would have thought not to recount and remember the exodus from Egypt in times of Messiah. Why not? Why not? Why should you forget that part of your history? The answer is, one way of looking at remembering the exodus from Egypt is remember the great things that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did for us. But the verses tell us that when the Mashiach comes, the things that will happen will put the exodus from Egypt in the shade. The exodus from Egypt can't compare to the gigantic miracles that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will do for us when the Mashiach comes, and therefore it will lose its interest. Therefore, the verse has to tell you, no, that's not true. It won't lose its interest. Now, why won't it lose its interest? In part because through that process, we got to the point where we could receive the miracles of the Mashiach. It's sort of like a kid. I remember when I got interested in mathematics, I was a junior in high school, and they had a special class for mathematics, and the teacher of the class would say, here's the next theorem we're going to study. Don't look in the book, prove it yourselves. Wow, that was great. We were on the telephone all night, how to do it this way, do it that way, could we manage it this way? Then we would come into class and present our proofs, and it would show us what was wrong with them, and then we go through the proof in the book. And so, in other words, instead of being taught and trying to absorb, we were being asked to be creative. That was a tremendous experience, totally unexpected in a math class, and that galvanized my interest in math. So I don't forget that. I'm a little bit older now than I was then. I don't forget that that was where it started. So here, too, the whole process of the Jewish nation started with the exodus from Egypt. And even though the later miracles are far more spectacular than the earlier miracles where it came from. We don't forget that. So that's the way in which they adjudicated this Mishnah. Now, that's all nice and good. Why is it in the Haggadah? What's it doing in the Haggadah? It's a Mishnah in Masechta Brachos. Really, it's talking about what we did in Shul. Twice a day, when you say Shema, the third paragraph is to remember the exodus from Egypt. We did that already in Shul. That's not what we're doing here. So I believe, at least part of the reason is to tell you, focus on that. Meditate on that. What you did in Shul is not what you're doing here. You did that already. That was finished in Shul. So what are you doing here? Here you're reliving it. That's why it's here. Just set it apart. Set the recital in Shul. That's very strange. Where the recital in Shul was just mentioning it in order to remember it, and here we're reliving it. That's what the Mishnah, reciting the Mishnah, does for you. Whereas when we put what it's put in here. Yeah.
I was wondering, like just in the previous piece where Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer and the 5 Rabbanim are there, it ends with the thing. So we have to say Shema, and then it goes to the Mishnah that is the Shema in the morning. And
oh, that's very nice. I like that. I didn't think of it in terms of Shema, but you're absolutely right. It is the third paragraph of the Shema, in which we say it. So the previous paragraph said they have to say Shema, and now I have a Mishnah about reciting the third paragraph of the Shema, but it's still Shema, 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 L'Gzer Shavah. I like that. Very good. I think that's very good. Very good. Okay, now comes the 4 sons. 4 sons is a very complex passage. And it's introduced by 4 phrases, 4 short sentences beginning with the word Baruch, blessed. So the 4 blessings have to do with the 4 sons, and I will talk about that tomorrow, B'Yus Hashem. I just want to raise the questions that should be raised, You can think about the questions. You can ask other people about the questions. Some of the questions are well known, and some are not. And these are the questions I'm going to address. First of all, let's look at the categories: the wise son, the wicked son, the simple son, and the one who's unable to ask. What's the importance of those categories? Who chose them? Does it cover everybody? Is everybody in one of those categories? Do they overlap? How are the categories related to one another? We ought to get some answers to those questions. What the origin of the categories is. That's one question. Second question, which is asked by Eliyahu Kitov, a brilliant question. Let's see. The third one is the simple one. He says, what is this? Okay, he's interested. But he's very simple. Sees what's going on. He says, what is this? Now, number 4, doesn't know how to ask what the simple son asked. He can't even ask, what is this? How old is he? Pray tell. 20 months? 18 months? When you'll have children, you'll see. Some of them are very clever. Right? At 18 months, you can certainly ask, what is this? 6 months old? Well, what does the Haggadah say to him? It is because of this that Hashem did so for me when I went out of Egypt. You're talking to a 6-month-old baby in diapers. Really? Is that credible? Who is this child who can't ask? It's a brilliant question, and he has a very interesting answer. We'll see tomorrow. Then, notice that the answer to the son is unable to ask, which I just read to you, is because of this that Hashem did so for me when I went out of Egypt. Skip back up to the wicked son and look at the end of the paragraph. You have the exact same verse. It is because of this that Hashem did so for me when I went out of Egypt. The same verse is used in answering the wicked son and answering the son who doesn't know how to ask. Does that indicate there's some connection between the two of them? On the surface, it doesn't look like it. It's just the fact that a person doesn't know how to ask doesn't make it wicked. So, why would you use the same verse twice? And let's look at the answer to the wicked son. I hope they do this right. Yeah, they do it right. There's a problem in the vocabulary here. I'll read you the whole thing. The problem's at the end, but I'll read you the whole thing so you have the context. The wicked son, what does he say? Of what? He puts in purpose. What is this work to you? What is this work to you? He says to you, thereby excluding himself. By excluding himself from the community of believers, which is their klal, he denies the ikar. I'm going to question this translation of principle of Judaism. Kofer be'ikar. Kofer be'ikar. He denies the ikar. Ikar means the fundamental thing.
Principle of faith, right?
I'm sorry?
One of the 13 principles of faith that God took us out of Egypt.
Yes, it can mean principle, but doesn't have to mean principle. That's a good point. Yes, you're right. You're right. It's not. You're right. I'm not going to say it's wrong. But I think in the context it's wrong. I'll tell you why tomorrow. Therefore, blunt his teeth and tell him. It is because of this that Hashem did so for me when I went out of Egypt. For me, but not for him. Had he been there, he would not have been redeemed. Let's try this again. Blunt his teeth and tell him. Tell him. So I'm speaking to him. So imagine talking to somebody. Richard, listen. It's because of this that Hashem did so for me when I went out of Egypt. For me, but not for him. Had he been there, he wouldn't have been redeemed. That's not what you should say. What should you say? For me and not for you. I'm talking to you. for me and not for you. So, what happened? It says, say to him, and then I end up, seems, not talking to him. Refer to him as him, then that means I'm talking to other people. So why is that split that way? We'll have to answer that tomorrow.
Because he doesn't believe.
What's that?
Because he doesn't believe. So he kind of rejects this idea that he's still in slavery.
You're explaining the reasoning behind the attitude.
Yeah.
I'm still wondering about the words. When it says, tell him, then you should refer to him with the word you, not he.
Okay.
I'm still working on the words. I think your explanation of the attitude is correct, but... And the final question, I said that was the final, but here's the final question. Let's go up to the wise son. What does he say? What are the testimonies, decrees, and ordinances which Hashem our God has commanded you? Therefore explain to him the laws of Passover offering. One may not eat dessert after the final taste of the Passover offering. Okay, fine. But he says, what does the wise son say? What are the testimonies, decrees, and ordinances which Hashem, our God, has commanded you? Why don't we jump on him and say, you? And not us? You and not he? He's not including himself? Well, he's excluded himself from the group, and he's denying the fundamental of Judaism and so forth and so on. Why don't we jump on him? He also says for you and not for me. Why is he different from the wicked son? So you think about those things for tomorrow, and we will continue tomorrow.